Good morning.
Morning.
When I was in school, when I was in the third grade, I started to find it difficult to see the board, and at first I was just like I could squint and it was okay, and then over time like squinting got a little bit more pronounced, and then at one point I remember that I used to use my finger and create a little hole in the end of my hand and look through it as if I was creating a lens. I didn't know what that was at the time, but when I could look through the little hole, I found that I could read what I needed to find on the board, and I was able to do the problems that I needed for school. Of course, what did my peers think? I don't know, but that's, I was a weirdo in other ways too, so it probably fit. But eventually, my fourth grade teacher said something to my parents, and my parents took me in to get my eyes checked, and sure enough, I needed glasses because I was fairly nearsighted. And I had no idea what that was or that even really existed, and I just knew that, I'm going to school and trying to do my work. But had my teacher not paid attention and gotten the help for me that I needed, how long would that have gone on, and how much would that have gotten in the way of the normal day-to-day schoolwork? And so today what we're going to be talking about is things that we do for students to help them get where they need to be. And those things are important and they matter. And the way that those are organized matters, and the way that we implement those matters as well. So first, we're looking at the difference between accommodations and modifications. We're going to be taking a look to see just like, what are those things? What are they not? But first I want you to do this. All right. When we do this, I'm a right over the left thumb. Sorry, left over right. Whichever one's on top. I want you to take notice. I'm left over right because that is the correct way to do this, by the way. I don't know how. If you're left over right, go like this. Okay, right over left. Wow, so we're about 50-50, right? And while I say left over right is correct because that feels right for me, it's not correct and doesn't feel right for other people. So beyond what's written on the paper for IEPs and 504 accommodations and things, there's a good deal of consideration that helps our students feel comfortable, and there's a way that we prefer to view the world and like to learn. And sometimes when we're forced to do the opposite, now I want you to switch. If you're left over right, go right over left, and vice versa. Okay, it's weird, right? If I made you sit like this for a while and said, okay, I want you to do something while you hold this together, and I want you to think, and concentrate, it would be a little bit difficult, probably a little bit uncomfortable, and that's not integral to your learning. It's just puts you in a state of discomfort because of personal preference. So when we're talking about this stuff, there's a lot more going on to what we have on the paper than what's happening in your classroom. So this summer I decided I wanted to learn French, and I've been putting a lot of time in. Mr. Dehanich also is learning French. He's my Duolingo partner. And for some of the challenges that we've had, I want you to take a minute and answer these questions. And if you've got some paper, I'm going to pass out a piece of paper. I want you to answer these questions. You got what you need?
Yeah.
Everybody's good? So, does anybody think they have a question for number one? Right? Alright. Go ahead.
B, 13.
13, okay.
How old is she?
Number two, does anybody get number two? Go ahead.
B, 2.
Okay. Anybody, number three, okay.
D.
And?
I said D.
Alright, number four?
C.
Okay. So everybody's good, right? We'll just move on to the next thing. So, yes ma'am.
I have a question. What in the world was that?
Okay. So maybe if we are assuming that there's a certain level of understanding and of reading fluency, for example, in the room, and we don't realize that we're coming at this from different, not only levels of understanding, but different levels of disability sometimes. We can rush in such a way that the content is not accessible. And so when we are talking about the words modifications and accommodations, foreign language isn't one of those disabilities, but in the same way, being able to decode words and use them in context and derive meaning in certain ways, when you have a reading disability, it presents itself in some similar ways as someone who's reading a foreign language. So someone with dyslexia would have a much more difficult time than another person reading a paragraph like this. Even if it is in their native language, it would probably require some extra time, certainly some extra guidance in the past, scaffolding to build you up to where you can read and understand this passage. And so if you aspire to know French like Mr. Dehanich, you would have had, how many days are you on Duolingo in a row?
172.
Very nice. It might take some consistency and some practice. All right. So this is an exercise that some of you may have seen before. What I want you to do is to see how long it takes you. If you have a timer, we're going to see how long it takes you to read the words from beginning to end. So if you have a timer, we're gonna hit start, and you're gonna time yourself. All right. So what I need you to do is just read the words. You can read it to yourself quietly, or you can read out loud if that helps you. And we're just gonna see how long it takes. All right. Ready? On your mark. Get set. Go. Okay. How many seconds?
11.1.
Okay. This time, we're going to say the color of the word and not read. So the first one would be blue. It says red, but the color is blue. Okay? So we're going to say blue, black, red, blue, gray. Okay? And I want you to time it again. We're going to see how long that takes you to get all of the colors right. On your mark, get set, go. times on the second one?
43.1.
Okay, so significantly longer to do a roughly equivalent task, but this time we had a fair bit of distraction. And so something was getting in the way between what you already knew could be done and your ability to accomplish that task. So sometimes the things that are getting in our way of learning are functional disabilities. Sometimes it's an inability to pay attention because a student is easily distracted, or they have some sort of attention deficit disorder, and in some way things end up being more complicated for a variety of reasons. And so when we're thinking about accommodations and modifications, we have to consider not only developmental kinds of things, but also things that involve setting and focus, attention. So today, this is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about what are accommodations, what are they not, what are modifications, what are they not, and then how can we best implement those to make sure that what our students need, they're getting, so that the goals that they have for themselves and that we have for them can be best accomplished. All right, first, accommodations. Accommodations change how the content is taught. They change how the content is made accessible, and they change how the content is assessed. In other words, what we have in common is the how. It's not changing what is taught, it's changing how. It's not changing what is assessed, it's changing the how. And it's not doing anything to reduce the expectations for the TEKS, for example, or for what our goals on our lesson plans are for the day. It does not change what the student is expected to master. Ultimately, they're going to need to master the curriculum according to the state. They also are going to be expected to still take the STAR assessments with everything that we know that's expected for them for the state as well. So accommodations are part of the specially designed instruction that allows students access to the general curriculum. It is what we use to get the students from where they are to where the students need to be with the same goals. And so what does that look like? Well, it says first, how will we know what they need? Partly, if it's captured already on an IEP that is based on data from previous years' classrooms. It also incorporates state assessment material in the evaluation of that IEP, and they take teacher input, and then that is developed to create goals, and of course, it's going to manifest itself in certain ways. And so there are four main ways that accommodations are used. The first is in presentation. We can change presentation to accomplish this. First, we can shorten assignments. We are not changing the goal of what it is that the student might have to learn. It just might require us to give a different, shorter assignment to see the evidence of that same goal. It might require a different kind of test administration, oral administration, for example. Again, it's the same test of material, it's just the way in which the student is accessing that. It might require some reminders to stay on task, or to be given some special tools to get the text to audio, for example, for those who have reading disabilities. It might also be some accessible material, like having large print if a person has difficulty seeing, for example, or Braille for a person who is blind. Can you imagine if you couldn't see and you weren't given access to materials that would help you to read in that way? It would be pretty impossible. second way we see it is in response format. Students can be given tools to help them access what they need to know for the test or for the material. So tools that are sometimes allowed and required are calculator, especially for math classes. It would be offering of word processing software, someone who has a difficulty where it's difficult to maneuver and handle the pencil, for example, dexterity issues, they might have an easier time typing, and so that could be an accommodation. Someone who is can use word prediction software. And then lastly, sometimes it's necessary in extreme cases to have a scribe that would transcribe what you're saying onto paper. So presentation, response. Number 3, setting. Preferential seatment. We're lucky to have a pretty intimate setting already with only 13, 14 students in a class. But sometimes, there needs to be a special attention paid to a student who needs a lot of extra attention, that you could provide more focused help because they're sitting up closer in the classroom. You can redirect their gaze without too much attention the closer that they are to you. Sometimes it's closer to your desk if needed for some extra help after you've assigned an assignment. Small group instruction is a possibility. It is also helpful to remove some distractions, and so that it looks different for different students. Some are distracted by certain things, some by others. So it's teacher discretion. And then lastly, the fourth way that accommodations look is through timing and scheduling changes. So offering extended time on assignments or on tests, or offering frequent breaks. Someone who has a difficulty focusing, maybe you could break up the assignment and have them change tasks or alternate back and forth between one assignment and another. In some way, reinforce that change of attention that's necessary. A cooling off period. We have had a few students over the years where it really does help. You can tell visually on their faces sometimes something isn't right, and we know, because you've been around those students long enough, okay, we need to take a break from this, let's think about something else, or let's talk about something else, and give you a chance to cool off for a minute until we're thinking more rationally and we're able to process in a better way. And then we mentioned this morning that in the past, the accommodations in the classroom were a little bit more closely aligned with what we were seeing on the state assessments, the STAR and the EOC, and how that over the last few years has changed a little bit, and there's a bit of a divergence between what can still be an accommodation that we're using in the classroom and the ones that you will see on the EOC. So it is important for us to know both lists, to know what it is that what we should be doing in the classroom, but also we should know what it is that the students will be able to have as far as accommodations on the test, and maybe more importantly, what they won't have as far as accommodations on that test. And so here's the list, the current list from the state of what they are allowing on the EOC. And so just take a minute to look through that. I don't know if you can see this pretty small. Can you see that? Okay. So a lot of the same things we were just talking about. Transcription, Braille, calculators, language supports, large print, manipulatives, having someone read it to you, oral assistance, spelling assistance, that wasn't on our list earlier. And then down here, having some extra transcribing help or perhaps some extra time. These, on this list, on part number 3, these require special approval from DEA. these do not appear, and these are available, and so they don't require extra TEA approval. Let's think now about modifications. So if accommodations is the how, modifications are changing the what. Modifications change what the student is expected to master, or the course activity, or even the TEAS objectives in certain cases. This is a much smaller population among our students and in students in general across the state of Texas. Those modifications are much less common in a student's IEP than accommodations. So we don't see this nearly as often, and the danger is we want to make sure that we are not modifying the material when we are supposed to be accommodating the student. And so that's part of the reason why this is an important distinction is we cannot change the what of the course when it is what we're supposed to be doing is changing the how. So modifications are not things that we should be doing for our students with 504. It's not part of that program. The 504 students are helped through accommodations, not through modifications. A modification requires that it be in the student's IEP, that it's tied to that PLAF development and the goals that are established, and then there is a specific content told and a way that that is applied in the specific room. So it's very specific when a modification should be taking place. Here's some examples. Using the same materials but for different purposes. So what that might look like. Circling all of the numbers that are 5s while others are adding in columns. It might be if their IEP requires them to only do a certain amount of the TEACs until they're meeting their goal, and then they're going to move on after scaffolding to get to the rest of the content at a later time. This might be one of the examples of modification. It might be a change in the level of vocabulary. So if there's a passage, for example, where we're going to be reading about electricity, and the vocabulary is a pretty long list, and what we're teaching to everyone is all of the vocabulary, the general and the specific, it might be changed and modified to focus on the terms that are a little bit more accessible and the most commonly used for that student. Example is we would maybe require the list to include battery and electricity, whereas we're requiring a more advanced student without modifications to know the difference between an ampere and a volt. It also might look like this. If we have an assignment where we are requiring a 5-paragraph essay, and we want claims and evidence and analysis, and what we're trying to do is get that student who has no chance of doing that at the current level and has had a modified curriculum, maybe we require a 1-paragraph essay, and we focus on them being able to identify the main idea, and then what's the difference between the main idea and the details that support it. So we're meeting them where they are, and we're trying to help advance them to get to bridge the gaps. It is actually changing what is assessed. Grading in certain circumstances has a different criteria with modifications. Okay, so I want us to talk about it for a minute. How do we, after seeing the difference, how do we best apply these in our classroom on a day-to-day basis? So I know that you may have seen this illustration before, and it's been protracted to apply to a lot of different things in popular culture. But I want you to think about this image for a second and think about the difference between fair and equal. Fair and equal. The situation on the left, is it equal?
Yes.
Fair.
Is it fair?
Left is fair.
For whom?
Well, it's fair, it's like everybody gets a box.
Mhm.
Everybody gets the exact same box, it's great. That's why I would describe it as fair.
But see, like, my mind says that's equal because everyone got the exact same size box, but it's not fair because should we be giving like a vertically challenged person a box
I'm
that's
saying
doesn't even
equal, I
let
see
them?
all their heads equal.
Okay.
So I see the right side is all equal.
Because they've
Yeah.
been given what they need to help.
Right, so they're all, so now they all
So that-
equally see, they all equally see.
So you're focusing on the outcome being
So it's,
equal.
depends on how you describe it.
Yeah.
What did they need to get them to get
If I
to
get
that
everybody
equal
the same
outcome?
thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's, but it's not.
But
The
is it
people on the
fair?
right, have they been accommodated?
Yes.
Okay, have they been given what they need to be able to
Right.
achieve
Yes.
that
Yeah.
equal outcome? Yes.
So I would say, yeah, they're all,
Okay.
their heads are all equal.
Thank you. All right. When we think about what we are trying to accomplish in our classrooms, we ultimately we want our students to be successful. Every student should ultimately accomplish what it is that we're supposed to be teaching, and yet we know that they're coming at it from various levels of understanding, and also some of them are coming at it with some pretty significant disabilities. And so giving them what they need is helping them to achieve success for them. All right, I want to show you a couple of things. First, would you exit out and go to the different tab to the right? I want to show you a couple of websites that I think are useful. So let's go to the one on the very right first, the Iris. Okay. So I want us to think about this question here, and I'm going to ask you to work with a group and sort out some of the answers to this question here. And I'm going to point you to a website that I want you to use as part of what you're doing to answer this question in a second. So Ms. Brown, would you mind working with these two folks? And so you guys are going to be a group of 4, and over here we'll have a group of 4 as well. And what I want you to do is read the scenario, and then based on what it's saying, I want you to answer these questions together in your groups of 4. So I'm going to read it to you, I'm going to pose the questions, and then I'm going to show you where I want you to go to help you organize some of your thoughts. So first, we've got 13-year-old Sonata has a learning disability. She is struggling in Miss Watkins' 8th grade class. It's a science class. It says, although she understands grade level content, she reads at a 3rd grade level, has difficulty identifying key ideas during lectures and independent reading. She also has difficulty organizing her ideas when writing. Ms. Watkins typically lectures using PowerPoint presentations while students take notes, which is similar to what we have going on here today. Requires her students to read the textbook and provide written responses to questions. Requires students to conduct lab experiments by following written procedures. Requires students to write up the results of their lab. Assesses her students using written tests. Based on what you know about Mrs. Watkins' class, lists at least 3 areas where Sonata might experience difficulty. List at least 3 accommodations that could be used to address the barriers related to her disability, including the accommodations category, and explain how these accommodations might help Sonata access and demonstrate her learning. And then finally, based on the accommodations recommended above, what tips might be helpful for Ms. Watkins to ensure that Sonata receives the maximum benefit from her required accommodations? Okay, so we're going to come back to this in a second, but I want to show you another website. It's the tab that says IEP goals. Nope, sorry, one more left. There we go. This is a website that I want to familiarize you with. This is provided through Region 13, and it allows you to customize the information about accommodations based on student need. And so if you'll look, the website is acentral.education, and it's going to take you to a page that looks like this. And I want you to notice that there are two tabs up here that you can toggle back and forth with. One is based on academic need, so go ahead and click on that. Academic need will show you, we've got challenges in reading or writing or math or social studies or science or electives, or you can pick multiple of those. And then it might also be a functional need. So somebody who's struggling with attention disorder, you can check that. Somebody who has issue with sensory things, you can check that. And then you can click Find Accommodations after you click. Would you click a couple? Let's do reading and do a functional need. Let's do sensory and then Find Accommodations. And it will show you some of the ones that would potentially match the disability or the need. And so obviously not all of these are going to apply to every student, but this helps us to narrow our focus when we're thinking about, okay, what does this student need? I think it's a good, useful tool that our state is putting out. And so I want you to use that in your discussion with your group as to, like, here's what we might want. It'll also serve as a good list, to help you remember what accommodations are, possible. All right, so I'll give you like 5 minutes to work on this. Would you go back to our problem page? There we go. Thank you. And you guys feel free to talk. Good catch.
Identifying and following right.
Also like lectures. So like probably
Yeah, she'll have to read.
textbook providing responses, reading the textbook together.
Helps you follow the
Conversations. I would think that that's probably.
Well, because writing and reading kind of go together. I was like, if she's trying to do that aloud, she probably needs pictures, to back up the words.
That's what she said, she read out loud.
No worries.
And then when she's doing it, the teacher just PowerPoint, she can print it out and give it to her just in time, or she can, do like, and I'll show her the few things. Right. Exactly.
That's what I get.
And then,
They don't have to sit there and write it.
right. I would say also to have a peer partner would be good for her to do a loud thing, that person could be fair. Also to be able to type it and see what use the chat.
Well, I don't know if it's
Well, for the reason.
I guess for.
Then you could, you could just spell check it for that, like the last part.
Yeah.
They have to do a while. I think it depends on. She might be able to use, text to speech. Yeah, yeah. That's a wonderful thing. There's a bit now that you can put it over your paper or anything and it'll read it.
2 more minutes.
Peer help.
Peer help, yeah, a peer buddy,
Text to speech.
incorporated photographs as well.
Yes.
I used to do that with like ELF students. So it wasn't like if I had notes, I would make sure there's some pictures match the words, so if they forgot what I was going to say, have the pictures.
our newsletter. I realized they were reading.
Construction company, and they had to list the steps to it, they were not gonna write it. They were allowed to physically draw step to step, so you could see, you know, that way they could describe in words, they could have a picture, okay, I did this, and that, and that. Put in words, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, draw it.
All right, guys. Looks like you had a good discussion, and you both have lists there, so I'm gonna ask you back and forth to give me some examples. The first question I want you to answer for the group is list some areas where you think Sonata might experience difficulty. And so I'm gonna ask this group first. List one area that you think she's gonna have some difficulty in.
All the things.
Yes.
They all involve reading.
Okay. Reading is a pretty foundational skill, and it does, when we face difficulty reading, affect all of the subjects. Okay, so yes, you are not incorrect. Okay, you guys?
Well, we just put, since they did everything about reading, then we'll just say writing the live results.
Okay, very good. So, we're back to you guys. I want you to tell me what was one of the accommodations that you thought could help address this person and this disability.
I printed a copy of the PowerPoint
Okay,
or an outline.
good. I printed a copy of an outline. And you guys?
Something Ms. Brown mentioned is like fill in the blank notes, like if you're going over it, instead of having them to write everything down, that there's certain key things that they want them to fill in.
Very good. All right, back to you guys.
Text to speech.
Okay, text to speech, and anything else?
Yeah, Ms. Moeller also and Ms. Brown were talking about using AI to rewrite everything to a third grade level, like taking whatever it was and rewriting it to
Okay.
a level that they could understand it, where they could practice their reading,
Right.
and it's not filled in for them, but they are still able to understand the concepts.
Thank you guys. That was, you had some good answers. Would you go back to the PowerPoint, Ms. Sims? And quick slideshow. Thank you. I want to pose this question to your groups again. This time I want you to think about what that looks like in our classrooms, and I want you to try to answer this question together and come up with some answers that you have ultimately written down. So more than just a conversation, we're going to try to come up with some real answers here that we can then share. So the question is, how can we avoid making students feel singled out? Because, I mean, some of us are old enough to remember the old content mastery room, and how when they would call someone out to go down to content mastery and there was the assessment and how public that example was, and then how it made other students feel in the classroom. And so what we're trying to do is to avoid falling into creating a stigma and also to try to minimize the stigma that might exist. Okay, so take a minute or two and talk about that, and then we're gonna come out with some ideas in just a minute.
I know.
We're accommodating the low financial people, but then there's that line. Is that it?
Right. Yes, ultimately the goal is accomplished.
Exactly.
You gotta think about some of the other side costs.
So that when they giving kind of instructions, here's what you do. Go, this is not really work on it. Just like.
Well, then they don't push.
Right.
It's also, I'm going to do y'all, it's not, I'm going to do this.
Yes.
This is what we're going to do, this, we're going to do this, and connectively, that's why everything.
I feel like it's weird that I've ever had a class where it's only just one kid in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, you know, just not being one or like a lot of times in a situation where you have just one kid, it's like, I always make sure I've talked to them prior, they know the drill, the routine. So it's like, unless you go around telling people, no one else would be really any wiser, because I'm gonna talk to everyone anyways, like.
Pre-K teaching is another thing, like, all the time pre-teaching.
Take about 30 more seconds.
Whatever it is, so they kind of heads it up before they come, so that's.
All right, this group looks ready already, so we're gonna start with you guys this time. What is one way that you would answer this question? How can we avoid making students feel singled out in this process?
We talked about in the testing situations, we're moving more to the online testing. So it's much easier to come up with two different versions of the test. Tell the kids ahead of time, don't say anything, but I'm gonna give you a separate code. So just wait till I come by and give them that code. And nobody knows that they're taking a different test.
Okay, and so that would require some extra planning and implementation ahead of time so that you could be ready, and then it is applied seamlessly, and the other students, would they even know that was happening?
And
So,
if you did it on paper test, have theirs already prepared, the numbers that you're marking out, or the extra directions, still the same stack, but nobody else knows that they got a special test,
Okay.
so to speak.
all right, now back to you guys. What was something that how did you answer this question?
Well, I mean, I've got like a few different things, but the thing we actually talked about, because I've done that kind of stuff, but for kind of your regular in class, we're doing an assignment or something, I'll sit people of equal skill levels or close to equal skill levels near each other, and then I'll give the overall assignment, then I go privately to the group that needs a little extra and tell them, all right guys, this is what we're doing, very quietly, everybody else is already working, and it's as a group, it's not an individual like, hey, you're gonna do this thing.
Okay.
So it's not pointing out what they're doing.
And so it could even include classroom design and seating locations, and so I think that helps us to realize that there is a lot to this question. And so sometimes just bothering to ask yourself, okay, if I were that student, what would I want to make sure that I would do or not do so that, you know, I'm not creating a situation that is unduly uncomfortable or singling that student out. Here's another question. How can we, oh, nope, you already addressed that. We're going on. All right. Final thoughts. Here's the last question I'm going to pose to you. How can we make sure that we minimized learned helplessness? Because we talk about how you know, these disabilities are real, that our students really do need help to get from where they are to where they need to be, and we have to do the things in our classroom to do that, but how can we do that in a way that doesn't present a way that provides them a crutch that they don't need? Okay, so that's the challenge, and that's the question I'm going to give you for the last couple of minutes. Go ahead and talk about that.
It's like tough love, like, and I really mean it towards like the things they need as they need it. But so for a kid who has a calculator for just 7 months, says to their calculator, I take it away, even if they need it. I say, okay, let's try this step. Try it without a calculator and see how far we can get, and then give it back. Or hey, you get the calculator once you're to the final part. So it's like you still give them the conversation and the modification, but maybe it's steps to slowly like raise that expectation of, okay, you have to get here before you're gonna get that.
And to see what they really need and how much, because that's, I feel like you have to get to know them first.
It's actually really good.
Exactly.
Like,
Tutorials. Well, then it's on their own time, which is
right.
better.
And so it pushes them to, I wanna get done, so I don't have to do these tutorials. I don't wanna treat it as a punishment.
No.
Exactly. But you still don't want to.
Yeah. And I think that comes back down to like the equal fair, raising the expectations where it's still achievable, like for that kid, but not meeting them where they're at, because like, if they see that you'll just stay.
All right, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need to push.
Exactly.
Across the board, high expectations.
For every,
High
yeah,
expectations.
of course, but still achievable, high but achievable.
Yes, I'm not
Yes.
expecting my kid to be able to unload the dishwasher.
Exactly.
And for all the stuff up top.
Yeah.
Alright, we're gonna go back to this group first, we're gonna put you guys on the spot. Alright, what is one way that you answer this question? How can we avoid this learned helplessness?
So we talked about setting high but achievable expectations. So for example, like, if you have a kid who needs a calculator for everything, like they rely on it, maybe they don't actually need it, you set little like benchmarks, like, okay, get through the first step with no calculator, and then give them the calculator.
Okay.
Just to see how far they can go. They still get it eventually, but that way maybe eventually we can get to the point where we don't always rely on it, because we learn to trust ourselves. Or like extra time we talked about. Not extra class time, maybe come in for tutorials, because then you're pushing them to try and finish in class and work their hardest. But then if they need it, they can still come in for tutorials, not as a punishment, but hey, if you still need that, I'm gonna help you, it just has to be on your time, like
Okay.
on this time now.
Awesome, thank you. And you guys, what was one of the ways that you answered this question?
So, we talked about, my situation in class is some of those kids will not speak in class. They're very reserved and they try to hide out. And so just giving them the warning, I am gonna ask you a question. Generally, I always let the kids speak in partners anyway, so they should have the answer by the time. And so I just make sure I'm listening to the conversation. And if they still can't answer at that point, then you can give them prompts, but just the expectation hasn't been dropped for them.
Okay.
Because for years, they've been allowed to just exist in the classroom and not have
Right.
any opportunity to partake in the conversations.
So what I'm hearing is, we have to think about each student in particular and where they are and what they might need. So you're talking about goals, and you said achievable, and in ways that are challenging to get them to that next level. So I think these questions are important for us to consider as we are implementing accommodations and modifications, and as we challenge them to have this growth mindset. Because all of our students, regardless of whether they are 504 or special ed or gen ed, they can do more than they think that they can. And we have to help them to see that reality. And so challenging them, I think, is key, and also helping them to have small victories that help to build their confidence along the way. So when we think about what we're doing in our classroom to help our students succeed, if when I had gone to the eye doctor when I was in the 4th grade, and the eye doctor had said, "Oh, you're fine, it's just gonna be a little bit blurry," and had sent me back to class, and here I was trying to squint and look through my little peephole here and try to zoom in, how much more difficult would my schooling have been, and how much more trouble would I have had on testing and memorization? And getting the right diagnosis is important, but also in the implementation of that diagnosis, that's important too. So thank you guys, I appreciate your conversations.